problems throughout this thing. Is that button?
That's the wrong mic, I think, John.
Hello, can you hear me? Maybe we don't need it. We've heard so much about energy.
Excuse me.
I feel a little bit like the fellow who married a fading Hollywood starlet. He was her fifth husband, and he was facing their first night together. And he thought, I know what I'm supposed to do, but I'm not sure I can make it interesting. We have a different form of energy crisis to deal with here. We have arranged the panel according to the program that you have, so you'll be able to see who it is that is talking. On the far side is George Beltz, the Iowa District Manager for the Standard Oil Division, Indiana, who will be taking the place of William Wall, who's on the program. Next to him is Maurice Van Nostrum, Chairman of the Iowa State Commerce Commission. Coming this way, the next person is Dr. Sam Tuthill, geologist, state geologist, and chairman of the Midwest Governor's Task Force on Energy. Next to him is Jim O'Toole, chairman of the Environmentology Council at Iowa State University. Next to him, Harold Anderson, director of Environmental and Local Affairs, Iowa Farm Bureau. I think I'll try to set the table for the discussion this afternoon by summarizing quickly where I see we are after having 2 lectures and a discussion between Dr. Commoner and Dr. Hubert. Dr. Commoner's view is that in order to understand the energy and environmental question, it's necessary to look at them together, that they have developed as a problem primarily since the end of World War II, that if you trace from about 1946 to the present time, in a number of areas, he used beer as the most interesting and the initial one. The value of the beer that we have at the present time is measured by what's in the bottle, and that is little changed, but we now have to pay a very much higher price for the bottle that the beer comes in. This is because recycling, which now is coming to be a desirable activity, was a way of life in 1946. The bottle was recycled 40 times, was returned and then filled up again. Now we have throwaway bottles, throwaway cans, so that while the value of life in many, many areas has remained not greatly changed, the environmental and energy price that is paid has gone up many-fold. He attributes this primarily to the profit motive, the fact that in the corporate boardrooms, decisions have been made to consume energy resources rather than recycle them because more bucks could be made that way. At that point, he sort of left the discussion. Questions were raised, where do we go from here? What do we do about it? And the most I got from what he said was that we have to change the decision-making forum from corporate boardrooms to public legislatures, public discussion groups. Dr. Hubbard was dealt with the subject of geology in fascinating long-term ways. The most impressive thing to me was his chart of 4.5 billion years and the very short blip of time, which is exhausting all or the greatest portion of the Earth's stored resources, coal, oil, natural gas, and the traumatic environmental effect that this is occurring, and he saw it, as I regarded it, primarily as a physical fact of this Earth. And when he was asked what kind of implications does this mean as far as our political system, his burden, I felt, was that of exposing the public to the fact of the depletion of the Earth's limited resources. In the panel between Dr. Commoner and Dr. Hubbard, the most vigorous exchange between them occurred over the question of whether the oil shortage was contrived or not. Dr. Hubbard, according to the studies that he had done over a period of years, believed that we are in a shortage situation, and according to his, what he regarded as empirical data, this was established as a fact of our physical setting. Dr. Commoner felt the oil shortage was contrived, that the oil companies decided a year ago that they would have a shortage, they would stage one in order to increase their profits. And I felt as if there hadn't really been a sharp, clear engagement between Dr. Commoner and Dr. Hubbard on this, that they were talking about different things. That Hubbard was talking about the physical setting that he observed. Dr. Commoner was more interested with the social and political economic decision-making processes, and felt that it was largely this arena which must be regarded in the search for answers. Now, this panel will be responding to these prior three lectures, and it will be concerned primarily with the effect of the impact of the things that have been said already on Iowa and on the Midwest. I don't know quite how this is going to shape up, but I think it will be interesting. First, we will have 7 or 8 minute presentations by each of the panelists. Then we will have an exchange among us, and then we will encourage the members of the audience to jump in. Mr. Belts, would you like to lead off?
I am not Mr. Wall, as you can have guessed by now, and Mr. Wall, I'm sure, perhaps would have had more profound things to say since he had more time for preparation than I did. And so I have some very brief words here that I would like to make that are just general, very general in nature, and I trust that as the afternoon goes on, we'll have an opportunity to answer many of your questions as well as I'm qualified to do. The Amoco Oil Company, of which I am a part, has endeavored during this energy crisis, and it is a crisis, to handle our obligations to our customers and others to the limits of our ability. Specifically, our primary obligation has been to the agricultural producer and to the space heating customer. As the manager for Amoco in the state of Iowa, I have no knowledge of any of the above-mentioned customers experiencing hardship or difficulty because of any failure on our part to perform. We have also attempted to fairly treat the other channels of our business so as to avoid any interruption of commerce or industry. Frankly, there have been times when this has been difficult, but we have experienced excellent cooperation from state governments in the use of the emergency set-aside program in these cases. During the next decade, this shortfall of petroleum will continue to exist. Amoco Oil, and I can speak only for my own corporation, is investing over $1 billion in 1974 in the search for new oil. We are also actively engaged in the development of oil shale resources and offshore drilling. This exploration investment requires large profits to enable the corporation to continue research and development on a wide basis. In addition, additional capital investments are required to modify refineries, increase refining capacity, and to maintain our present facilities. Also, since we rely upon public capital from each individual out in the marketplace, we must pay dividends in order to attract that capital. Oil companies have been criticized by many facets of the public and by certain government officials. Admittedly, we have made mistakes. However, we need to get to the task and stop the name-calling in order to achieve our goal of self-sufficiency in the mid-1980s. Total cooperation of industry, the public, and government is required to meet that goal. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Maury, would you like to go next? Maybe you can tell a little bit about Iowa's experience.
Okay, thank you, John. I think those of us in Iowa responsible for the energy management program have been very enthusiastic with the response and the cooperation of our people. Iowa got involved in this energy situation before many of the states of the Union. Our governor was willing to take some real risks and asked state government to get involved to try to fill some of the gaps which showed up beginning in late November 1972. From that time until now, we have learned quite a lot about the energy distribution system that serves this state and the interrelationships of those energies, and put together on our own last winter, I think, a very successful emergency program for distribution of heating fuel, heating oil, to those areas of the state where the local distribution system simply couldn't meet the demand. And from that time until now, we've been successful, I think, in convincing the federal government that much that we learned would be applicable to other states in the nation, and the present federal mandatory allocation program for all petroleum products does reflect, in large part, much of the experiences that we had here in Iowa. For my own part, right now, as director of Iowa's energy program and also as chairman of the Commerce Commission, I think I have to express disappointment in the direction that we're now going as a nation. I think it's very politically appealing to tell the public that the real emergency is over, that you can go ahead and make your plans to take your vacation as you wished. I think at that point we're stepping back from the conservation dedication that we'd hoped would persist. We think it's wrong. We see nothing in the figures to justify any strong assurance on the part of anyone that we're not facing some very tough times ahead. There's nothing really in the figures that we're looking at on a day-to-day basis which would provide that kind of assurance. At the present time, our set-aside, which gets 3% of all the gasoline that flows into the state, is putting out about 225,000 gallons a day to some 5,000 stations across this state in order to provide gasoline in all the communities of this state. And we're supposed to have enough gasoline in April of this year to provide agriculture with 100% of its demands and to provide between 87 and 90% to the stations of the gasoline that they got in the comparable month of 1972. So far, that has not come to pass. Each one of the oil companies is required by the 25th of the month to provide our office with a figure on what they intend to distribute in Iowa for the upcoming month. And those figures do not reveal the kind of a commitment that would take to achieve this goal. The balance of it comes from the redirection of the Federal Energy Office in Washington, and although they've assured us of those amounts so that we can have 100% for agriculture, and it's growing very heavily this month, and 87 to 90% of all the stations, so far we haven't had it. We get very spooky here at the local level when they put out words of reassurance in Washington that aren't backed up by gallons. It takes gallons to make the reassurance valid. In the long run, I think we have a very serious problem. We're looking at an almost certain curtailment of natural gas for our heavy users in this state, our industries, our hospitals, our schools. We see no way that the Arab states, regardless how cooperative they might want to be with the United States, can fill that gap with petroleum product unless we can significantly increase our coal production and the usage of coal. We think we're looking at a very severe problem down the road. So generally we think that people in Iowa demonstrated their willingness to cooperate and with an ongoing conservation program. We felt the entire nation ought to do the same, continue on this, because there's nothing ahead to indicate the problem's over. I think some very serious decisions have to be made in the area of transportation, where I think the greatest possibility for an additional cushion could come from. Those decisions have not been made. We continue to waste phenomenal amounts of fuel in transportation, both of goods and people. It'll take a change in the direction at the national level to alter that, and I think those changes need to be made. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maury. Sam, the ball's yours. Sam was saying he was playing ping pong after lunch, so
I was
sort of
losing
bounced
at ping pong after lunch.
well, maybe you can be
It's
a
been
winner now.
It's been that sort of week, Joe.
Anyone who can lose a coal mine without crying shouldn't mind a ping pong game.
Every little bit hurts. I think that it's not just a semantic problem that we face, but I think there are two very real and very different, although related, phenomena that society is facing. One is a fuel shortage, shortfall, whatever you want to call it. The other is the real, long-term, continuing, we're going to be living with it the rest of our lives, resources problem that we're facing. And energy is just one aspect of the resource depletion problem that this society and most of the societies of the world must face. And I think you've had very good data presented to you by M. King Hubbard. There certainly is no one more capable of giving the facts of it. What we do to solve the shortfall of fuel is the kind of a thing that government has a major, if not the only, significant role in. It's a stopgap, executive decision type thing, move in. We've had a very excellent administrator of an emergency program in the person of Bill Simon. We've gotten gas out there, or when there was panic, there was the appearance of gas, whether it was actually gallons or not, that quieted people down and made them go home. Give you some example of how panicky people can be. I was traveling into Washington about a month ago with Governor Ray, and as we were at the back of the plane. I don't know whether that's where they always put governors or not, but the hostess was very anxious to get us off the plane, and I said, "What's your rush?" And she said, "Well, my husband has hired a high school student to drive my car down here, and he's got his car down here, and we're going to drive from Washington National up to Pennsylvania because there aren't any gas lines up in Pennsylvania. We're going to fill both cars up and come back tonight." Now, that's a social state of panic. In order to move in and solve that kind of panic reaction in society, we have taken some stopgap policy and called it an energy policy. We've said we will allow price to float regardless of the cost of delivering service or the cost of the fuel that's pumped at the moment that you're paying for it. We've said this will induce more investment, more commitment of capital to more production and more refining capability so that we can provide the amounts of fuel that society has come to expect. And that during the interim that we're managing our fuel crisis in this way, we will pour billions of dollars into research for other energy sources, and we will deplete our petroleum resources at a more rapid rate than had been expected to buy the time to get there for the other exotic forms of energy that research and technology is going to provide us for in the future. That's a very considerable gamble, maybe one that can be brought off. But I wonder whether it's wise policy when we look at the long-term energy situation that the society of the world faces, the resources crisis that we face, to deplete our domestic reserves and our outer continental shelf very rapidly to continue with an essentially wasteful use of fuel. Now, the National Bureau of Standards says that we waste about 40% of the fuel that we use to heat our buildings. And here in Iowa, I think we've seen perhaps not 40% conservation without major capital investment in structures, but we've seen at least half of that. That could, within the framework of our present petroleum production and refining, there's no question about the fact that we need some more refineries, but without a huge escalation and a huge depletion of our domestic reserves, we have a growth factor of at least somewhere between 20 and 40%. It seems to me silly to deplete resources, and our petroleum resources are roughly about 1/40th of the Middle East and North African states, deplete our resources rapidly to continue a wasteful syndrome of fuel use. Our government is going to play a real part and continue to play a real part in solving shortfalls of fuel, because those are economically and socially disturbing phenomena, and they can be handled by executive and legislative action. There are many things that government's done that work against energy conservation. Those will have to be reviewed and changed, and I think they will be. But when it comes to solving the long-term energy and resources problems that we face as a species, it's anathemas too far into the system. Every one of us is involved. Every one of us is affected. And I think government's fundamental role there will be in leadership in articulating the facts of the case and changing society's attitudes. I think one of the first goals that we have to face as society is to look at some new criteria for choice and decision. We, since at least the time of the Hanseatic League, have learned to make choices on the basis of economic criteria. That's become the language of decision. All of us operate on a universal language of economics. We don't always do it very well, but we always speak to the choice, the decision, in terms of economics. I think we have to put as a co-equal, the environmental costs and the resources costs as a triumvirate of criteria for decision in the future. This will have to come out of society. It's not going to be legislated.
Thank you, Sam. Okay, Jim, go ahead.
There's an old Moldavian saying. I don't know whether you know about Moldavia, but it's full of sayings. And one of them is, if you want to hide a disaster in the kitchen, start an argument in the parlor. And basically what Sam has said is exactly that. We've paid so much attention to the current petroleum crisis that we've lost sight of King Hubbard's real projection of the limits of resources. Perhaps the Arab crisis was a good thing. It unveiled a lot of situations that should have been unveiled a long time ago, not only with respect to resources, but with respect to institutional functioning. Fundamentally, this whole energy crisis is the essence of our society. Energy is related to the resources that employ energy in its conversion. It's related to the standards of living that have evolved. It's related to the industrial and agricultural productivity that we have seen grow. And it's related to environmental decision-making. We can't think of any of these as separate or distinct from the current energy crisis. The other relationship that we have lost sight of is time. We've tended to be concerned with the short term, solving it by 1980. We may get an extension to the year 2000 if we employ initially certain conservation measures. But beyond the year 2000, which is only a generation away, what are we going to do? Are we going to faithfully look forward to great technological breakthroughs like fusion and so on? And what about the other aspects of our lifestyle? What are we committing in terms of options? What options are we losing by going full pace at the current rate of economic growth? And when you talk about energy use, you're simply talking about economic growth, the total measurement of resource use, production of goods, environmental problems, and the use of basic resources. At the current rate of energy use, over the last 25 years, it's been 3.4% roughly per year, roughly double that in the last few years. Now, if we take these projections and say this is what the American public is going to require by the year 2000, a doubling of electricity every 10 years and a doubling of total energy every 20 years, what's that really going to commit us to? It's going to commit us to exploitation of a great many resources, not simply energy resources, but all of the raw materials that we have domestically and will import. If we look at the scenarios that have been proposed for possible introduction and while I'm speaking to that subject, I want to point out to you that the only in-depth study that has been completed recently is the Ford Foundation Energy Policy Project, which has been in operation, a multi-million-dollar project in operation for the past 5 years. And on the board of advisors are representatives, executives of fuel companies, metals companies, government, and others, have done a tremendous job in organizing the options into a set of 3 scenarios. Scenario 1, which is a continuing historical growth. Scenario 2, which is a technical fix scenario, which introduces, as soon as it's feasible, certain mild constraints like home insulation, like the changes in institutional requirements, and finally a zero growth scenario. And we find even in zero growth of energy that there is very little constraint on lifestyle. Until something like this is available to the public, reaches it in detail so that they can examine the options, as opposed to the Chicken Little type education we've been getting lately, I think that we're going to still be in the dark. So I recommend all of you get this for 75 cents. It puts together the hodgepodge of data in a form that gives you an example of options that you can decide whether you want to do, whether the nation should do it, and so on. Basically, the education of the public has been a dismal situation in this current energy crisis and in the long run. And I think in speaking to Hubbert's information, the failure to legitimize long-range assessments in our society has been the basic cause of the problem that we're facing now. So I think that sums up pretty much what I have to say now.
Thank you, Jim. Harold, would you like to tell us what the farmer, who we all respect and is very dear to Iowa, how he views this?
Well, I won't guarantee to express the sentiments of all farmers because that would be very difficult. In fact, it's very difficult to identify just how much fuel is used in farming, mainly because of the problem of identifying what farming is. If you talk about production, the actual production of food and fiber, we can say reasonably accurately that about 3% of the total energy of the country is used for that type of farming, the production side of it. But if you take agriculture in all of its parts, including the manufactured inputs, the growing, the processing, the transporting, and making food available to the consumer, we're talking about 12 or 13% of the total energy requirements of the country. Now, the use of petroleum fuel to supply energy on farms is one of the main reasons why the ratio of farm employment to the total population is lower in the U.S. than anywhere else in the world. In 1973, farm employment totaled 4.4 million out of a total population of 210 million. The last time this country had such a small farm workforce as 4.4 million people was in 1840. At that time, most of the production inputs came from the farm itself. In 1840, one farm worker produced food for 4 people. In 1940, that's 100 years later, one farm worker fed only 11 people. But in 1973, one farm worker produced food for 55 people. So we're following the trend that has been referred to previously of this explosion in post-World War II periods here in total production and, of course, the accompanying use of energy. Now, obviously, Iowa is an agricultural state. About 94% of our 34.3 million acres are in agricultural land. And in 1973, 23.6 million acres, largely corn and soybeans, were harvested. And in 1974, we're expected, or it's anticipated at least, that there will be probably another 1 million acres added to our total harvested acres. The first critical period for fuel consumption in agriculture is during the spring planting season. Normally, farmers in some part of the state will be in the field preparing the soil or planting the crops from about March 20th to May 31st. But usually the soil is not fit for planting crops for only about half of that time. In other words, what we're saying is that this year, about 24 million acres will be planted in a little more than 1 month's time. And of course, adverse weather conditions in the interim at any time during this period could result in even drastic reductions in yield. Fuel allocations have been promised to meet 100% of the needs of agriculture. And no doubt the intentions are good, but to get that fuel down to the farm at the time it is needed is certainly another problem. Very difficult problems of distribution and timing. The next critical season will be during harvest and grain drying. And here again, if there's a wet fall, we may have difficulty finding enough propane gas for grain drying. The sharp increase in export demand for corn and soybeans has increased transportation requirements for moving grain to export markets. Our railroad system is grossly inadequate to meet these transportation requirements. The result is that motor trucks are used for long hauls to distant terminals and to Mississippi. Just wasn't in a barge position landing. to support. You Considerable perhaps read savings recently of fuel about could be made if our railroad system will the King reorganize Food Host, which to attempted provide better and to more complete sell service the soya burger. and to reduce the need for
Well, that was a big
trucks,
decision. The public didn't
especially
buy
for
it.
long haul.
Now they are reversing that decision and
Farmers, the fuel is
trying to come
projected
back
rise
to
about 9
another,
billion gallons in 1980,
back to where they
about a
were, the
15%
regular
increase over
beef burger that they
1973.
were advertising. And in the future, it seems to me that we are moving into an area here where whoever is making decisions must have more information available at the time the decision is made, which means opening the corporate boards to some type of accommodation, perhaps where government does provide additional information and additional services of this nature, perhaps a closer coordination between a government agency and corporate boards if we choose to make corporate boards the real kingmaker in making decisions.
Okay, now we'll open it up and get some questions from the audience. All right.
My question is for the gentleman from Amoco. You mentioned that your company has allocated $1 billion for 1974 for research and development of new oil sources. And I wonder if you could tell us what other energy sources Amoco owns and what kind of budgeting you've done for development of those sources.
Our total capital expenditure for 1974 is $1.4 billion. The $1 billion is for research for new sources of oil. The balance is for upgrading such as the $80 million I mentioned before. Amoco Oil Company is in several enterprises. They're in the plastics business. They're an international oil company, and we market in several countries in Europe and Australia. And I believe you asked me what other energy sources we are involved in. Well, we've done some research on gasification of coal. I really can't answer specifically if we own any coal businesses or not. I do not believe we do, but I could be incorrect. I'm really not aware of the fact that we do. I just read our annual report, and I'm not aware of anything of that type in there.
How about non-fossil fuel resources?
Uranium.
Well, we do. Maury just mentioned to me that we're involved in some uranium, apparently, that I was not familiar with, and I appreciate you telling me that because I was not familiar. If it is, it's on a minor scale. So basically, we're in the fossil fuel business, and that includes natural gas and petroleum. Because when you develop a well, you don't know whether you're going to find natural gas or petroleum. You take what you get. So we're involved in those two, basically. Thank you.
Question over here?
Comments on whether you think the Iowa coal beds will and should be exploited.
What are your latest views, Sam?
I think it's coming out of the ground.
By a vote of 26 to 23, no.
That's whether we have any involvement in how it comes out of the ground. I don't know how much of you've gone through this, Wally, but essentially, there is a situation in Iowa that in general is like this. You have in the interflues loess, till, shales, and stringer limestones, and coal bottoms. Because of the position, and I promise you I'm not going into the whole Pennsylvania history, because of the position of Iowa in the Pennsylvania seas, the bodies of coal tend to be lenticular, and in comparison, say, to what you have in Indiana, southern Illinois, Kentucky, West Virginia, they are not continuous. They don't go from one end of one county to the other. They're lenticular bodies. Okay, geologically, this is a disadvantage because it's a lot more economical to come in with some big equipment, mine nice thick bed of coal, and keep moving. But what you are faced here is mining out these lenses. Finding them in the first place is not made easy by the fact they're not continuous. Now, this part of the geologic history is pretty advantageous and exciting because till is a very low permeable material. The limestones and the shales and the coal contain pyrites. An old fellow up near Billings, Montana, that used to sell an awful lot of it by calling it the gold that fooled the miners. This is fool's gold. It's iron sulfide. When water with oxygen in solution falls on it, it makes sulfuric acid. It also makes rust, which isn't particularly good for water either. But the sulfuric acid poisons the water, poisons the soil. You could, if you're lucky, you can grow crown vetch on it. I don't regard that as adequate reclamation for Iowa land. Now, if we can mine in such a way it's economically feasible to bring the coal out of the ground, and put it into, at the present time, translation by means of either gasification, which is not too much of a probability in Iowa because the water demands on gasification, but into electricity and into replacing some of the natural gas that's going to be curtailed in 4 years. Bringing this land, reducing the slope, making a more uniform layer of loess, which is the best soil forming material in the world. Reducing slope, thereby reducing our major water pollutant, which is eroded soil. Returning the land to better agricultural capability, conserving the water. I think that's the best way to use that particular fossil fuel. Now, to hope that industry is going to do it under a very high market demand, and as we see the curtailment of natural gas, I think Iowa coal is going to come out of the ground because it's going to be worth a lot. Eastern Kentucky coal is now worth $26 a ton. Last year we were selling coal, Vern, what, $6, $7? About that. That's a pretty big differential. With that kind of transportation spread, which isn't a factor in the economics of coal extraction per se, we can almost make cream of wheat out of this coal as far as making it useful without environmental degradation. If we could demonstrate that it can be mined economically in a way that doesn't destroy the land, I think we've got a chance to see the extraction and utilization of this fossil fuel in a reasonable amount, in a reasonable way. To allow industry to do it under just economic pressure is like asking prisoners to build your jail.
Do you have any other questions spotted around?
No. You just pulled my chain, I'm sorry.
Someone.
Oh, I was being facetious about the cream of wheat. We've got about 6% sulfur in Iowa coal.
She said, what are you going to eat when you take from the strip mine?
Oh, when I get done with the strip mining, I'd like to plant corn and beans there instead of just crown vetch. I know we can.
There really aren't any unknowns about it.
Not if you leave the pyrite at the surface. All right, gypsum is not particularly, I don't think we're extracting gypsum in a particularly environmentally satisfactory way either.
But it's
Or
a
limestone.
it's a mixing together of those that's made the land so it's of no value. And by keeping them separate and putting them back, there really isn't any doubt that you can end up with that land in more productive position than it was to start. It's just a matter of economics. In that particular
Yeah,
instance,
sure.
yes, there's nothing about having coal down there that really adds to the productivity of the land, you know.
The
So we
glacier,
ought to
when
be
it
pulling coal
deposited
out.
the hills in south central Iowa, did not have agriculture as its target.
No.
It had gone back to Canada for more rocks as its purpose.
Can we move on with glacial speed?
Can I speak?
Oh, I'm sorry. Jim,
I want to disagree on this basis. First of all, I have no quarrel with the technology which Sam and his team proposes, but I do object to the lack of consideration of the processes that we've just been trying to speak to. For example, what's the priority of developing a strip coal mine in Iowa compared to alternatives? Secondly, what kind of a legislative legal base do we have to protect the public and ensure that this, when it does take place, is going to be done correctly? Have we prepared the seedbed for this kind of activity? And third, what about the role of direct participation of industry? Why should the legislature set aside $5.5 million for this kind of a project while the utilities are to gain? In other words, this should be shared by the power users.
I don't want the utilities.
Huh?
There are 2,800,000 Iowans. They use electricity, they pay taxes, they enjoy the electricity. There's no way that coal is going to be paid for any other way than by 2,800,000 Iowans. So if the utility companies benefit from lower cost coal, it flows through to the ratepayers. If the utility companies have to pay more for the coal, it flows through the ratepayers. So you got an automatic.
Precisely, Maury, and what I'm questioning is, does the rate structure assess the cost fairly in this case?
Oh, it doesn't assess the environmental costs. We all know that, Jim.
Well, $5.5 million coming out of state coffers. What I'm saying is that the benefits don't accrue equally to the users and the demanders of power. It should be a more direct relationship.
Well,
But I have-
actually, it's your office up there that would be getting the benefit of this activity because the coal was to go to Iowa State University.
Well, I'm sure of that, and it's not my office, and I can see why they're encouraging this kind of a promotion.
Well, I think
But
it
it's
was a
not-
great deal more serious than a promotion.
No, let me put another alternative to you. Iowa agriculture leaves on the ground enough energy every year equivalent to 3 times all of the energies and fuels that are produced by the utilities in the state. Now, a group at Iowa State, Ag Engineers, have worked long and hard on developing an idealized system for recycling. I think that in terms of what long-range considerations have to be made, this should be placed on an equal basis.
The proposal for the coal mine was never the only answer.
That's all I've heard about, though.
Well, you got to take us.
That's all you promoted.
Until a year and a half ago, who cared that Iowa only produced 1.7% of its energy? It was, if you're going to have a big speech some night and talk about that, nobody to come. All of a sudden, it becomes very, very important. So you look at the resources that we have and those which can be most quickly tapped and then hopefully develop the way to tap some more. But certainly, there's nothing right now that can become so readily available, so quickly available to reduce this vulnerability as those coal reserves.
The
So that's a
pyrolysis
logical first step.
of animal and municipal waste,
Right.
we've been at that for 3 years, Jim.
Well, now, Wade, you've been at it, but you've been talking about it. What I'm
No, I've been-
speaking to is setting aside an adequate sum of money legitimized by legislative appropriations that addresses itself, first of all, to this kind of decision-making. Who made this decision in the first place? There were very few people that really knew what was going on. What I'm saying is that it all should be laid out, and then the decision-making process should begin.
Well, if you think the legislature could figure something out as complicated as you're talking about, we can't even explain a coal mine to them.
Well, I don't buy elitism either, Maury.
Well, I
Well,
think,
there's something pretty simple about pulling coal out of the ground and washing it, trying to remove the iron pyrites.
Simply
and so doing.
disastrous, yeah.
And, no, not disastrous at all.
has
If it's
been.
Well,
disastrous, you ought
certainly
to challenge
it's
those
been.
people on the staff up there with you. Sure, it's been disastrous.
you
Why do you
wanna
think
go
the
on
DeWitt was
doing it
built on
that
this
way?
river down here, so you could throw the junk in the river? That's why. We're not doing it anymore.
Well,
you
now,
see?
suddenly we've forgotten history. We've forgotten the disastrous history of strip mining in this country. Now we're going to do it right. And this is the only alternative. I say it is not the only.
You said that, I never
Not
said
doing
that.
it all. All
Okay, let me, I won't try to summarize the 2 points of view. That I wouldn't dare.
You're being stupid, Jim.
But let's see if we can go on to another question. There's a gentleman back here in the green shirt.
I'd like to know something about the technology that you propose, the machinery that you propose to operate these strip mines.
Well, the machinery mix is a part of the evaluation in itself. Right now, most of the coal, except that which is mined underground in the state, there are only 200 underground mines, is coming out by diesel shovel. The first preliminary engineering assessment made by a private company that has, corporate interest in seeing equipment sold, pointed out that for about $14 a ton, with use of large front-end loaders and Euclid-type earth scraping, those are the two methods you could go within the framework of what WAPCO had to offer in the way of equipment. And for about $14 a ton, you could produce and wash coal backfill to a plan grade, essentially the Cologne method. Now,
How deep are the seams then?
well, these will obviously
35 to
vary.
50 feet.
We're talking about 20% of the coal of Iowa would be strip mineable to depths of about 80 feet. So we're not talking very, huge,
20% of recoverable reserves?
no, of
Resource.
the measured and inferred reserves. We're not talking the kind of a situation that you face out in the lignitic coals or of Wyoming, Montana, and the Dakotas, because we don't have the continuous sheets of 40 feet of lignitic coal that you have to deal with. So the mining techniques, the reason I think that it was important for the state to spend some money in the research was that the lenticular shape, the geometry of the coal bodies here makes the traditional type of big strip mine operation uneconomical. And so therefore, it's not the kind of thing that the coal companies, out of the goodness of their heart or their opportunity to make money, are going to research. There was an attempt to evaluate the mix necessary to mine coal in an environmentally acceptable way, if you will assume the return of land to agricultural use is an adequate environmental goal. I assume that.
I think we have a question over here.
I don't understand.
Two questions based on the merit and puzzle. And I have two questions. One for the state government. Why in the world would you ever reduce the speed limit to 55 miles an hour when you economically can do it better at 60 and 65?
Well, of course,
What was
that-
your second question?
The premise is wrong to start with. You can't do, I don't know what you're talking about doing better, but your car, you can,
Trucks and your automobile.
yeah, well, let's talk about the cars first. There's no question on the cars. Everyone in here can be a research scientist. I've run my own tests on that. And your car will save, well, my car saves 15% gas between 60 and 50. I get 15% better mileage. There's almost no car that'll get less mileage at 50 than at 60. Now let's take the trucks. They have said and said and said several hundred thousands of times that trucks are more efficient at speeds in excess of whatever it is. No one has given us any figures yet. The Cummins Diesel Engine Company provided us with data using three criteria. One, the grade of the road. Two, the weight of the load. The grade of the road, the weight of the load, and the gear train. And one of those combinations of the three was more efficient at 57 than at lower speeds. No other combination of those three showed any saving above 55 mile an hour. They just keep saying it. Once a trucker says, I can do better at 65 than I can at 50, he said it, he's satisfied, all the truckers believe him, so you've accomplished something. There is nothing to support that. And they tell me that the reason my...
If my guy who has some business or a person that's in professional, doing this all the time, not just going out running the test on it, knows what he's doing, like a car dealer, or a trucking company, or a driver, or a professional driver.
Well, oil companies.
Well, now, schedules, yes. When he puts in labor time and meeting the schedules, yes, but I'm talking about just fuel alone. And they also tell me that the reason my car does better at 50 than at 60 or at 70 is because I decrease wind resistance. And I would say that if that's valuable in my car, which is about so high it ought to be valuable in a 19-foot truck.
I think we've got here a difference in opinion. You have apparently a source that you believe says there are economies at higher speeds. Maura, you have some studies that indicate that your studies are.
The best speed, and they, ran all kinds of commercials, and maybe they were liars or something, but I don't believe so. And I've known too many people.
A lot of faith in General Motors.
All I can say, we've waited patiently for data to support the statements which trucks do better at 65 or 70. We haven't had any. And let me remind you this, when we all sit down next Christmas to eat dinner, there'll be 150 Iowans eating Christmas that wouldn't have eaten if we hadn't slowed the speed down. That in itself ought to be a pretty good goal,
Well,
They'd have been dead.
I am much more assured that when they said, okay, everybody drive at the speed that you think it's going to, save the most gas. People go a lot slower around the state, and you can see them just driving down the highway a lot slower. And, you see them doing 50 or whatever, they try to save gas. So there was people going around and stuff like that. But as soon as they said, okay, 55 mile an hour, we're not going to do this anymore, this away, everybody said, forget it.
Right, I agree with you completely. Our voluntary 50 mile an hour speed limit was observed very well, but that wasn't the case across the country. And the problem was across the country. We didn't need to be muscled.
I'm going to have to call a close to this. I think you get into dispute. My data is better than your data. It's not going to be too productive.
I see what he's pointing to.
Okay, the second question is, both our commentators this afternoon brought up one point, and I guess it was, why are there, American oil companies, now Amoco, why are they reducing the exploration in the United States as far as your company is concerned?
Well, they have been reducing through the years for a couple of reasons. Number one was the reduction in the depletion allowance, which went from 27.5% to 22%. And secondly, and more importantly, is the control of gas at the wellhead by the Federal Power Commission. And by virtue of that control, keeping gas at such a low rate, it has destroyed some of the incentive to drill. Now, drilling is not a sure thing. When you drill a hole, you don't always find a well. You may find a dry hole. In fact, you find a dry hole more often than you find gas or petroleum. And therefore, as the costs continue to increase, and the Federal Power Commission would not release the control of gas at the wellhead, it destroyed much of the incentive to drill.
Is one of the measurements that was used earlier was the feet of pipe drilled per productive well discovered. Is that an accurate measurement of the success of exploration?
Well, I'm afraid that I'm not an engineer, and I'm not so sure that I could answer intelligently on that question.
What I'm trying to find out is, you've given two factors. I've wondered if there is another factor that is the success of your company in finding oil when it sank wells. That is, how many wells did you have to sink now using the best exploration and techniques that you've got to get one well that pays off compared with your success 30 years ago?
Maybe
Well,
I can help on
I
that.
think maybe, yeah.
Geologists really haven't got any better or any worse. It's still about 1 out of 13. But the number of places you can sink those 13 wells is getting reduced by exploration and by depletion. Jim mentioned a point here. I think you've got to own up to the fact that Japan, Western Europe, Chile, Ecuador, every emerging nation is becoming an international, part of your international market. And if you can produce Saudi Arabian oil and sell it to Holland, the gilder is not all that much different than the good old Screaming Eagle.
Well, Hubbard, if I understood what he said accurately, said that more wells had to be drilled now to get one that was successful than had been the case in the 30s. Now, are you saying?
Congress point was made that the gallon per foot drill was the same in 1930 as it is today.
I would suspect that's
He
true.
said just because the decrease of the number of wells doesn't mean that's why we're having a problem.
I think Hubbard's indicated that he disagreed with that and thought that more foot
Well, this was
drilling
this was Hubbard's data.
I have seen Hubbard's data, and Hubbard's data has some very high productivity drills for a number of years, and then it levels down into sort of a plateau. I think you can run a line through that
two different ways.
John, I think you have to remember too, intensity of activity has some effect on the success ratio. If you're drilling out, say, something like the Cedar Creek Anticline or the Williston Basin, once you've zeroed on a basin and start to refine your drilling, there are two things that will affect your drilling rate. The luck of whether there is petroleum in the place it ought to be, according to geology, and then the other kind of thing that you probably aren't much aware of, and that's the regulatory spacing. For instance, in the 1930s, most states would drill, they checkerboard town lots. If you found oil, the best thing to do is drill a lot of holes and suck it out. A good bit of reservoir engineering's come in, and now 640 acre spacing is fairly common in most states to control over exploitation of the natural reservoir head. You lose a great deal of oil by extracting it too rapidly. And so that now once you make a discovery, you're not shooting a lot of wells because you're taking it out over a longer program to get more oil out of the ground. And that's only really come in the last 25 years.
Well, this gets into the question that Commoner and Hubbard disagreed on, whether the oil crisis was contrived or real. Hubbard said that it was real because the success in finding oil when drilling was done was not as great now as it had been before. It looks like we still have that same disagreement. Question here.
I'd like to address this question, Mr. O'Toole. What are your feelings about nuclear energy in general and nuclear energy in Iowa in particular?
There's your friend, Jim.
I think they go together. My feeling about nuclear energy is pretty well voiced by Commoner this morning. I think that the existing system of light water reactors should be addressed to solving the problems that have been raised by the emergency core cooling system, the problem of disposal of wastes, and secondly, the basic examination of need. Now, what I see in all of these meetings is a preoccupation with numbers with respect to BTUs, with respect to barrels of oil and demands. Now, we don't pay any attention to the examination of the institutional factors that have created this. For example, projecting in the future for needs requires on-stream plans of nuclear power plants by 10-year lead times. That means that when some decision is made to site a plant today, the use of this power has to be also considered. It's got to be there, and one bespeaks the other. If you plan a set of power production facilities for 1980, you better be sure that that power is going to be used. If it's not going to be used, there's no need for the plant. But if the plant decision is made, you can bet your boots that that power is going to be used and encouraged to be used some way, so that two have a feedback system. The only way to break this chain of feedback systems is to examine them. Now, by and large, the utility industry has made its predictions on short-term casual projections. It's to their advantage. It doesn't hurt them to build a plant because this adds to their capital investment and increases their income. It's only recently that there have been two major studies, one on a national basis and one distinctly separate in California, that have shown that the price-demand relationship is there despite what the utilities claim. That our needs are not as great as they would like to have us believe. A thorough econometric study done by a combination of Federal Laboratory people and Cornell University shows that the Federal Power Commission's projection is wrong using their own data. Now, this process should be extended to every state in the Union, and I can provide anybody with a reference to this material. This situation was tried in the case of Mohawk Power in Upper New York State, who wanted to develop a plant by 1985. Before the Utility Commission of that state, the data was examined under the new econometric system, and the power plant was shown not to be needed until the year 2000. Now, I think that if we pursue an examination of the institutional factors that are involved in predicting power and energy needs, we'll do a hell of a lot better than worrying about how many barrels of oil are left in the ground and how many unborn babies there will be because of radiation. I've been in the radiation, professional end of radiation for 25 years, but I still feel that the security of the system is not adequate. I think that perhaps nuclear power may have to sometime play a role. But we're being beset by all three of these exploiting mechanisms. They're going to rip out Western coal. They're going to build nukes all over. They're going to drill the continental shelf, drill the slope of Alaska. They're going to import liquid natural gas from Russia. Everything's going to be all done at once. We're going to have to go out and build, right off the bat, 40 giant cryostat tankers to bring in liquid natural gas. We're going to have to deepen ports. It's ridiculous. There is no scenario of decision-making that's available to the public until you read the Power Policy Project. It's been a long time in coming, and I hope that it gets ventilated because it's not the answer, but it's the beginning. We have to begin to conceptualize this whole problem.
Maury, I know you've been involved in this problem of trying to figure out what energy consumption will be and whether some of the projections are the basis upon which they're made. Do you have anything to say on this question?
Well, I think there's no doubt that the what we call a rate design of utility rates has to be re-examined and reevaluated because of this new factor, and that is the shortage of energy itself. Basically, the rates have been designed to promote the use of more energy, but that's not just true of electric utilities. Everything that we have done in the United States has been to bring about the use of more. I mean, how much more would a Coca-Cola cost if all of us Coke drinkers drank the same amount of Coke we drank 20 years ago? But we drink more, so therefore they make more, and therefore it costs less per bottle. So if you turn this back, you have to turn it back not only on the regulated utilities, which would really be rather easy, but you have to turn it back on the alternate forms of energy. In other words, here's a big factory out here. He wants to buy more electricity or more energy. The electric utility can't provide it, so he builds his own generating plant, or he uses some other form. So that's not the answer. In other words, you're injecting government or some public decision-making body into what heretofore has been totally unregulated. Now, I don't disagree at all with the necessity of reevaluating, but let's not kid ourselves. When we got the report in the other day that in the first quarter of this year, the smallest electric utility in this state had sold 9.2% more electrical energy in the first 3 months of 1974 as against 73, I was shocked. Now, they did not go out and merchandise all that energy. Those people out there bought it. So we can talk about it, but we're not ready to really reduce consumption of energy at this point.
Let me broaden that view, Maury. There are instances when there are, as you say, when there are shifts to other energy sources, which obviously took place here because the Edison Electric Institute, national statistics, showed in the first quarter there was a decrease of 1.5% in electrical energy consumption. And this is significant when you compare it to an annual increase of 8%. In other words, this was 9.5% less than it was during the same quarter the year before. The American Petroleum Institute, likewise, showed that in the first quarter there was a decrease in 3% for petroleum demand. The same period in the previous year showed a 9% increase. Now, to me, that shows, first of all,